Imagine standing atop a vast dune in the Sahara under a brooding sky. The air is heavy, strangely humid, and a distant rumble grows louder. Suddenly, sheets of rain burst from the clouds. In minutes, the baked earth is awash. Water races down dry gullies, turning them into streams. The air suddenly feels cooler, and the smell of wet earth rises, a scent almost foreign in the Sahara. What was endless sand just moments before becomes dotted with shimmering pools. It's like a scene from a dream, or perhaps a long time ago when the Sahara was green. But this is real, and it happened in 2024. In late 2024, an extraordinary storm swept across southeastern Morocco at the edge of the Sahara. In just 2 days, this arid region received more rain than it typically would in several years. Villages like Tagounite saw nearly 100 millimeters, about 4 inches of rain, in 24 hours, far above the yearly average. Locals watched in astonishment as water pooled in blue lagoons among palms and dunes. Dry salt flats and ancient lake beds, untouched by water for decades, suddenly filled up. Lake Iriqui, a basin that had been bone dry for about 50 years, was reborn as a shimmering lake. Satellite images captured a bright splash of blue where there had been only endless brown. Camels and goats wandered to the new lakeshore, unsure what to make of this sudden abundance. For people around the world accustomed to thinking of the Sahara as a vast dry expanse, the sight of lakes and wet sand in the desert was almost unbelievable. But before we dive into the flooding at Sahara, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more cool and informative videos like this one. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll know when a new one drops. The human impact was a mix of wonder and alarm. For desert communities in Morocco and Algeria, the downpour was a blessing for the thirsty land, but also a cause for concern. Children laughed and splashed in puddles where their parents had never seen water before, marveling at the novelty. Some people drove from miles away to witness the surreal sight of their desert blooming with water, a phenomenon they had only heard about in stories. At the same time, flash floods were tearing through villages that had never needed flood defenses. Roads turned into rivers of mud, stranding travelers and cutting off remote outposts. Some abode homes collapsed under the weight of water they were never built to withstand. Tragically, around 24 people lost their lives in the region. Farmers saw their parched fields briefly drenched, only to watch their crops wash away in the torrent. Even a small dam failed under the strain, sending a dangerous surge of water downstream and forcing families to flee to higher ground. What seemed at first like a miraculous gift of water revealed a destructive side. Nothing like this flood had happened within living memory. In parts of the Sahara, years can pass without a single raindrop. Local elders said they hadn't seen anything comparable in half a century. Meteorologists confirmed that this was the Sahara's most intense flooding event in about 50 years. Back in the 1970s, there were a few accounts of heavy rains forming temporary lakes. But in modern times, such sights had become nearly mythical. Occasionally, a brief cloudburst might dampen the sand, but nothing on the scale of the 2024 deluge. This rare flood was a stark reminder that even the driest place on Earth can still deliver surprises under the right conditions. As astonishing as it was, the Sahara surprise flood was not an isolated fluke. Other famous deserts have experienced similar rare and dramatic flooding in recent years. Take the Atacama Desert in Chile, often called the driest place on Earth. In 2015, the unthinkable happened in the Atacama as well. Dark storm clouds gathered over northern Chile's desert mountains in late March of that year. Normally that area might not see any rain for decades, but over a couple of days, those clouds unleashed a year's worth of rainfall or more. By most standards, the totals were modest, a few dozen millimeters, but in the Atacama, it was enough to cause chaos. Dry riverbeds that hadn't seen water in ages turned into raging mud flows. Towns like Chañaral and Copiapó were hit hard as floods tore through streets and homes. By the time the skies cleared, at least 24 people were dead and thousands of dwellings were destroyed or damaged. It was the region's worst flood in almost a century. Some places even recorded their first measurable rain in living memory. The parched soil couldn't absorb the sudden downpour, so water raced downhill, carving new gullies in the desert. Yet in the aftermath, the Atacama offered a poignant sight. Weeks later, dormant seeds sprouted and the desert floor burst into a carpet of purple and pink wildflowers. It was a brief, beautiful bloom that hinted at the life hidden in the desert, even as residents were left cleaning up an ocean of mud. North America's deserts have seen floods too. Death Valley in the Mojave Desert, famously one of the hottest, driest spots on the planet, was slammed by an unprecedented flash flood in August 2022. Monsoonal storms dumped about a year's worth of rain, over 1.5 inches, in just a few hours. Tourists watched as a wall of water and debris came roaring through the canyons and across roads. Cars were engulfed by mud and rocks, and every road in the national park was washed out or buried. It was described as a once-in-a-thousand-year rain event for that valley. Shockingly, a year later in 2023, the desert was deluged again when the remnants of a Pacific hurricane swept inland. These back-to-back floods left park rangers astonished. 2 extreme floods in 2 years. In a place that typically gets barely a couple of inches of rain in an entire year. The damage was extensive. Pavement buckled, buildings were swamped with silt, and Death Valley had to close for weeks. It was a stark illustration of how quickly conditions can slip from extreme dryness to overwhelming water. Even the Gobi Desert in Asia has felt the effects of uncommon floods. The Gobi, which spans parts of Mongolia and China, is a cold, windswept desert where rain is scant and usually light. In the summer of 2018, parts of the Gobi saw sustained heavy rains that locals hadn't witnessed in decades. Nomadic herders in Mongolia's Gobi region found their yurt camps besieged by sudden streams. Dirt roads became impassable muddy bogs. In some areas, floodwaters washed out sections of the single railroad line that crosses the desert, disrupting travel and trade. Small villages, which had virtually no drainage infrastructure, were suddenly inundated. Livestock and camels, so crucial to families' livelihoods, were swept away or later died from exposure when grazing lands turned into swamps. For a desert used to drought, too much rain proved just as challenging as too little. People were awed to see rain falling at all, even as they struggled with the damage it left behind. What is causing these deserts, places defined by dryness, to suddenly get drenched? Each of these floods had its own immediate trigger in the weather. In the Sahara, a large storm system drifted unusually far south, effectively an atmospheric river of moisture that dumped torrents over the sand. In Chile, a rare warm Pacific weather system pushed moisture over the Andes, turning what normally would fall as snow in the mountains into rain on the desert below. In Death Valley, an intense summer monsoon storm and later a tropical storm's remnants parked overhead and unloaded torrents onto the desert floor. And in Mongolia, a kink in the jet stream allowed a series of rainstorms to soak the Gobi. In short, an array of freak weather conditions set the stage for each flood. An extratropical cyclone here, a cut-off low there, a stray hurricane elsewhere. These weather systems wandered into places they seldom go, and with them came an unexpected deluge. In each case, the normally sun-baked ground could not absorb water fast enough, so the rain turned into instant runoff, raging over land as flash floods. Beyond the immediate weather triggers, there is a bigger picture. Our climate is shifting, and that can intensify such extreme events. As the planet warms, the atmosphere holds more moisture, which means when it rains, it can rain harder. In effect, a warmer climate loads the dice for heavy rainfall. It can also disrupt the usual patterns of atmospheric circulation, making the jet stream and storm tracks more erratic. The year 2015, when the Atacama flooded, coincided with a strong El Nino, a Pacific Ocean cycle that tends to bring wetter weather to Chile. And overall, rising global temperatures have been linked to more unpredictable rainfall patterns. Scientists note that as temperatures rise, the world is facing both harsher droughts and heavier downpours. In other words, we get either too little or too much water. In simple terms, the hydrological cycle is becoming unbalanced. So while deserts might mostly get drier with global warming, they may also occasionally experience these freak deluges when conditions align. All of this raises a big question. Are these desert floods red flags of an accelerating climate crisis? Many scientists believe they are. Events that were once nearly unimaginable are happening in front of our eyes. They vividly illustrate that no place on Earth is truly immune to the effects of a changing climate. Not even the vast dry expanses of the Sahara, Atacama, or Death Valley. This doesn't mean deserts are turning into wetlands, of course. But it does mean the weather rulebook is being rewritten. What was once impossible can no longer be completely ruled out. Looking ahead, scientists warn that such extreme events may become more frequent in a warming world, raising the stakes for our response to climate change. There are practical lessons to be learned from these surprising floods. One is that communities in even the driest regions need to prepare for the unexpected. City planners and engineers might consider flood defenses or better drainage in desert towns. Unlikely as that sounds, because the cost of being caught unprepared even once can be devastating. For instance, building sturdier roads, better drainage, or small dams to channel flash floods could protect communities when a freak storm hits. And if properly managed, even a sudden flood can be turned to some advantage. For example, filling up empty reservoirs or recharging groundwater to help ease the next drought. Another lesson is the importance of global action on climate change. Each of these floods is like a message from nature that things are shifting. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions won't stop rain from falling, but it can help limit the warming that is supercharging the atmosphere with energy and moisture. Finally, there's a mixed sense of wonder and warning in these events. The image of palm trees reflected in a new Saharan lake or wildflowers blooming across Death Valley is almost magical. Shimmering oases appearing overnight as a reminder of nature's resilience and its capacity for surprise. But it's also an unsettling preview of a future with a destabilized climate. Deserts flooding are like a plot twist in a story we thought we knew. They remind us that we're entering a new chapter where the past isn't always a reliable guide to the future. In the end, the deserts have delivered a clear message in the form of water where it doesn't belong. If these floods are nature's red flags, it's up to us to heed the warning, so that such thrilling anomalies remain rare exceptions and not the new normal.